I was never chosen. In a life filled with sacrifices and unrecognized efforts, I get to choose myself. Chapter 3: Indoctrination and Hierarchy. Irte corruptum in educationem, don't move. This pair of portraits is the first I made. For this chapter, I was looking to explore the way in which what we wear defines us, and how a uniform can take away our individuality, turning us into just another member of a group. I was also interested in name tags, reminding us of our name, but also our title or position in a group. These tags and labels that indicate our place in the hierarchy. In these portraits, I appear with a school uniform I used as a student in Mexico and my work uniform I used for my first job in the US. I changed the logos to tell my story, creating a contradiction and a dilemma between the concepts of staying or leaving. The first is titled Irte, corruptum in educationem. Irte means to leave or go away in Spanish, and corruptionem educationem means corruption in education in Latin, and it speaks to my experience as a student in this educational institution. The second portrait title is Don't Move, referencing how I felt trapped working in that place. Both confined to the space between the borders of the canvas, one hopeful for the potential of a future of recognition through discipline, while the other seems to have lost all optimism without a chance to escape. The previous painting, Careful What You Wish For, prepares us for this chapter, which relies on the text we see in the painting to understand the full scope of the portrait's meaning. The red carpet trail also connects us with the red vest in the upcoming painting. In chapter 2, we have the contrast of the inactive seated figure and the moving character. And in chapter 3, we transition to the contradiction of going away against not moving. I made these portraits right after quitting my job, where I lasted 6 years without knowing an alternative. It was like ending a toxic relationship in which endless times I justified the lack of appreciation of my work and the injustices of those that held greater power. These paintings are in honor of those difficult choices that forged the path of my life, allowing me to grow and change through honesty and sacrifice. For one of the portraits, I took a photo in my work uniform, and for the other, I referenced old photos to put together the composition. I made sketches to scale in which I experimented different options for the background before deciding to keep it flat to keep the focus on the figures. I transferred the drawing to the canvas using a grid, worked a base layer in acrylic paint, and began adding the final layers in oil. Then I followed the same process for the second portrait. I was not convinced by the portrait in my school uniform, and I couldn't quite tell what was off. Having used different photos for reference made it even more difficult to decide which direction to go. I digitally changed some features, fixed the placement, and finished the background as best as I could. Even this improved version of the painting was not enough for me, so I decided to start over. I chose a new photo, changed the direction of the eyes, and made some adjustments to the clothing. The new photo showed a more natural expression and more interesting angle. The process went a lot smoother, having a single reference, and I learned that some extra effort in finding the right reference can save a lot of time in the long run. Once both of these portraits were finished, I was ready to continue to explore the concept of portraiture and push the boundaries of my creativity. School. Going to school in Mexico, I learned that even if I earned a grade, my teachers had the power of choosing to give me whatever grade they wanted. When I was in 7th grade and the first evaluation period for math class came, I had all the points for assignments that accounted for 80% of the grade. The other 20% was graded based on attitude and behavior. I was well behaved, did all the work in time, and participated often. I had accumulated 8 points from assignments, 2 points for behavior, and aside from that, I had an extra credit point. In total, I added 11 points out of 10, but the teacher gave me a 9, with the argument that she didn't give out 10s to anybody in the first evaluation period, so that students didn't think her class was too easy. This didn't make sense to me, and I couldn't understand how a math teacher made a calculation so arbitrary. I had a streak of always obtaining the maximum grade in the subject from years ago. This incident made me lose motivation to be academically successful. My grades meant a lot to me. In my early school years, I was always diligent in class and often participated in school activities. I had the highest grade average of my class every time and received many accolades. I had many teachers with fair judgment and great teaching abilities, but many others who got their teaching positions through connections and didn't seem to know what they were doing. There was another teacher I had in middle school who taught ethics, and when she would grade me, she would always give me tens. Once she told me, "What else could I grade you with?" as if she was unwillingly giving me the highest grade, despite doing all the assignments as asked. When I started ninth grade, there was a change in the administration of the school. This teacher took advantage of her influences to be the one to carry out the directions of our school events. She was a tutor of the other ninth grade group, and she always gave her students the opportunity to participate in said events, while our class was mostly ignored. There is an award, which is the highest recognition given by the school, that is granted to someone graduating middle school or end of ninth grade in Mexico, based on academic performance. It was evident how this teacher used her influence and power so that one of her students that was always assigned leadership roles by her received this accolade. Academically speaking, a number of other students had a point average that was higher than hers. Mine was the best of the generation. When the award was presented, there was emphasis in that this recognition prioritizes leadership before academic performance, as if trying to justify that choice. I was always willing and participating in whatever I was given the chance to, and I had the best grades of the class. I still believe perhaps I should have gotten the award if it weren't based on something so subjective that cannot be measured objectively. This experience taught me that no matter the amount of sacrifice and effort, deserving is not enough. For high school, I only attended 2 semesters in Mexico. Based on my grades and admission test scores, I should have been given priority in choosing my school shift. I wanted to attend in the morning since that's what I was used to. However, they assigned me to the evening shift. During this time, I was able to present myself from scratch, without prejudice, without being the studious one that had difficulty socializing. I encountered many friendships that made these hard times more tolerable. It was a challenge to adapt to a new school shift and deal with the negligence from administration. Occasionally, some professors I had wouldn't go to class without prior notice. Some others would arrive late without justification, as if they didn't take seriously the time and education of students. It was no secret that many teaching positions were given based on connections and influences rather than knowledge of the subject or the ability to teach. Being school the only thing I dedicated my time, attention, and effort to, I suffered from not being able to do anything to improve my conditions. This made me go through an identity crisis. For my second semester, I was one of many students that asked for a change to the morning shift, and they did give it to me for having the best grade average. I had hoped that things would be better in this shift, but everything stayed the same. One day, someone from administration came into the classroom to ask who spoke English, because there was a potential opportunity to study abroad. It was another classmate and I who raised our hands. We were asked some questions in English, and he showed interest in her. I was dismissed on the spot. This incident led me to think about how studying abroad would perhaps solve all my problems. I had already gone to school in the US in elementary, and in comparison, everything had always been better. More opportunities, resources, and appreciation of effort. I insisted to my mother that I didn't want to be in Mexico anymore, and I convinced her to let me go to the US. When I was 15, we traveled to the US during the summer to visit for 2 months. If I was able to find someone to live with, I could stay. And I did. Work. I arrived to Nebraska, United States, with my mother and my sister. When they returned to Mexico, only I remained. It was my first time apart from my family, and at 15 years old, I began to work and take care of myself. My choices had forced me to grow. I will always be thankful with my aunt and her family for letting me into their home. In exchange for periodic affordable payments, I didn't have to worry for food or a place to live. During this time, I learned to better appreciate everything my parents had done for me, because I began to not only work to sustain myself while being a full-time student, but I also was in charge of many responsibilities I would delegate in the past. My first job was in a fast food restaurant. I applied there because it was the only place that was walking distance from where I lived, and back then I didn't have a car. When I applied, I didn't know how to do anything, but I was willing to learn. Although I was hoping to work as a cashier, I was hired to start working in the kitchen. I barely knew how to cook at home and had to learn how to fully operate and clean fryers. Most of the cooks were Mexican and spoke Spanish, but they wouldn't take me seriously. I don't know if it was my age or the lack of ability when I started, but they all thought I wouldn't last long. No matter how difficult the job was for me and how disrespectful my coworkers were, I didn't have any other options. I was missing my family and I was tired of all my responsibilities, but I was more tired of my situation as a student in Mexico. I had to keep going without asking myself if I wanted to leave everything and return home. Because if I did, perhaps I would return to the situation I wanted to escape from in the first place. I began working in fryers and washing dishes. Then I worked dressing burgers and making salads, and finally learned to operate the grill. During summer vacations from school, I would go to Mexico to visit my family and take a break from work. In this period of time, I would rest and recharge to return more motivated to work and study. In the 6 years I remained at this job, I learned to do all kitchen work. Then I worked as a cashier and finally was ascended to a supervisor position. But without getting a pay raise that was proportional to the work I was expected to do and the time I had remained working for the company. When I started college, I had to get a car to be able to get to campus. Once I had a car, options opened up for me, and I could have left and looked for another job. However, I decided to stay out of gratitude because they were the first to give me an opportunity. Time after time, there were situations that showed the lack of accountability of other coworkers and the people in charge. I would speak up about it and hope that things would change, but they never did. My patience ran out, and in that moment, I decided I didn't ever want to work again with someone or for someone that doesn't show the same commitment and dedication I am willing to put into what I do. It was important for me to make this painting right after quitting my job, and to me, it was the best way to begin my journey into this project. In summer vacation of 2021, I left my job for the last time without knowing if I would come back. I didn't return. After 6 years, I had ended my journey working in that place, and despite feeling anxious for the uncertainty and change, everything worked in my favor. When I came back from Mexico, I applied to work in a few places that matched my availability as a full-time student. I had 3 job interviews in the same day. In the first 2, they assured me they would call me soon so I could start working. But in the third, they hired me on the spot, so I kept this job. I worked here as a waiter and bartender for a year. In the first month of work, I was still in vacation from school, and I worked as many hours as they would give me. I had never earned as much money as fast. The money I was making was mostly from tips, and for the first time, I felt like I was being compensated proportionally to the work I was doing. Although this job was very demanding physically and mentally, in the year I remained here, I was able to save enough money to leave for my last semester in school and focus on my thesis project. There's no point in pretending to be brave if it only gets you closer to your grave.